The screech of metal against concrete echoed through the abandoned shopping mall as Zephyr dragged another mannequin into position. 3 weeks had passed since the first reports of the infection, and now the undead roamed the streets like a plague of locusts. But Zephyr saw patterns where others saw chaos, strategies where others saw hopelessness. The former military strategist had always approached life like a chess game, and this apocalypse was simply the most complex board he'd ever faced. "Sarah, how's the medical station coming along?" Zephyr called out to the young woman organizing supplies near the old pharmacy. Serafina Volkov looked up from her makeshift triage area, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, medical textbooks scattered around her feet like fallen leaves. She had been in her final year of medical school when the world ended, but her quick thinking and steady hands had already saved 3 lives in their small group. "Almost ready," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the slight accent of her Russian grandmother. "Thad's motion sensors should give us early warning if any of those things get too close." She gestured toward the entrances where Thaddeus Okafor was installing his latest creation. The brilliant engineer had transformed from designing water treatment systems to crafting elaborate zombie detection devices in a matter of weeks. His dark fingers moved with precision as he calibrated the sensors, each one a masterpiece of salvaged electronics and desperate innovation. Marlo Kim crouched near the mall's central fountain, surrounded by a spider web of cables and communication equipment. The former radio technician had managed to establish contact with 3 other survivor groups across the city, creating an information network that had proven invaluable. "Zephyr," Marlo called out, adjusting her headset, "Group 7 just reported a massive horde moving southeast. They estimate over 200 infected, heading toward the industrial district." Indira Blackwood emerged from the stockroom, her arms laden with canned goods and water bottles. The former elementary school teacher had taken charge of their supplies with the same organizational skills that had once managed classroom chaos. Her gentle demeanor masked a fierce determination to keep everyone fed and equipped. "We have enough provisions for 2 weeks if we ration carefully," she announced, her British accent lending authority to her words. From the upper level, Cassius Reed dropped silently to the main floor, his parkour training making him their most effective scout. The lean young man moved like water, flowing over obstacles with an economy of motion that had kept him alive in the dangerous world outside their sanctuary. "Perimeter's clear for now," he reported, "but I spotted 3 stragglers near the old bookstore. They seemed different. More alert." Zephyr absorbed this information, his mind already calculating possibilities. The infected had been evolving, becoming more cunning with each passing day. The shambling corpses of the first week had given way to creatures that could problem-solve, hunt in coordinated groups, and even set primitive ambushes. It was this adaptation that had convinced Zephyr their survival depended not on firepower, but on superior tactics and preparation. "We need to discuss something," Zephyr announced, his voice carrying the weight of command that had once directed military operations in 3 different conflict zones. The group gathered around him in the mall's central court, their faces reflecting the strain of constant vigilance. "The infected are learning. Each encounter teaches them something new about us, about how we think and move. We need to stay ahead of that curve." Sarah nodded grimly. "I've been analyzing the bite patterns on the bodies we've recovered. The infection is definitely mutating. The neural pathways show increased activity in areas associated with pattern recognition and tactical thinking." Her medical knowledge had proven crucial in understanding their enemy, treating it not just as a threat but as a puzzle to be solved. Thad looked up from his sensor array, concern etched across his features. "My early warning systems are only effective against predictable behavior. If they start thinking strategically..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood the implications. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the mall's skylights, carrying with it the distant moans of the infected. Winter was coming, and with it, new challenges that would test every strategy they had developed. But as Zephyr looked around at his team, he felt something that had been rare in recent weeks: hope. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were becoming something more dangerous than the monsters outside. They were becoming strategists in a war where adaptation meant the difference between life and death. The motion sensors screamed their electronic warning at 2:47 a.m., jerking the 6 survivors from their restless sleep. Thad's eyes snapped open first, his engineer's mind immediately processing the data streaming across his improvised monitoring station. Multiple contacts, northeast and trance, he whispered urgently, his voice cutting through the darkness of their makeshift camp in the mall's old electronics store. Zephyr was on his feet before the echo faded, his military training overriding the fog of interrupted sleep. He moved with practiced silence to the observation post they had established overlooking the main concourse, Cassius close behind him. Through the cracked skylight, pale moonlight revealed their worst fear realized, 15 infected moving through the mall's entrance with a coordination that chilled Zephyr to the bone. These weren't the mindless shufflers from the early days. They moved with purpose, spreading out in a rough formation that suggested tactical awareness. "They're hunting," Cassius breathed, his scout's eye picking up subtleties that others might miss. "Look at how they're checking corners, staying in visual contact with each other." His observation confirmed what they had all dreaded. The infection had reached a new evolutionary milestone. Sarah appeared beside them, medical bag in hand, her face pale but determined. She had seen enough death in the past weeks to steel herself against fear, but this calculated approach from the infected represented something entirely new. "How did they know we were here?" she whispered, watching as one of the creatures examined the barricades they had carefully constructed to appear untouched. Marlowe's voice crackled through their earpieces from her communication station. "I'm picking up subsonic vocalizations. They're actually communicating with each other." The revelation sent ice through their veins. The infected weren't just coordinating, they were actively sharing information about their environment and their prey. Indira had taken position at their primary supply cache, ready to implement their evacuation protocols if necessary. Her teacher's instincts had adapted remarkably to this new reality, treating survival scenarios like elaborate lesson plans that needed to be executed perfectly to ensure everyone made it home safely. "Secondary exit routes are clear," she reported through their communication network, her calm voice providing an anchor of stability in the growing tension. Zephyr watched as the infected systematically began exploring the mall's first level. Their movements revealed an understanding of human behavior that was deeply unsettling. They checked the obvious hiding spots first, the storage rooms, the restaurant kitchens, the security office. But more disturbing was their methodical approach to areas that offered strategic advantages. They were thinking like soldiers. One of the creatures, a woman still wearing the remnants of a nurse's uniform, paused directly below their position. She tilted her head in a gesture that was almost human, listening for sounds that normal ears couldn't detect. Her infected senses had enhanced beyond human limitations, and for a terrifying moment, Zephyr was certain she knew exactly where they were hiding. "Phase 1, Zephyr whispered into his microphone, initiating their first contingency plan. The weeks of preparation had included scenarios exactly like this one. Thad's fingers danced across his control panel, activating a series of audio distractors they had positioned throughout the mall. Recorded sounds of movement and conversation began playing from speakers hidden in the opposite wing, creating false signatures designed to draw the infected away from their actual location. The strategy worked perfectly. The infected responded to the audio cues immediately, their enhanced hearing proving to be both an advantage and a vulnerability. They moved as a group toward the sounds, their formation remaining intact even as they pursued what they believed to be their prey. It was a masterclass in misdirection that bought them precious time to observe and learn. "They're maintaining unit cohesion," Zephyr noted, his strategic mind cataloging every detail of their enemy's behavior. "Someone or something is directing their tactics. Look at how they're leaving sentries at key positions while the main group investigates." The infected had posted guards at the mall's major exits and intersections, creating a containment pattern that would have been impressive in a military operation. Sarah studied the creatures through a pair of binoculars, her medical training allowing her to notice details others might miss. The neural decay patterns I observed in earlier specimens suggested this kind of tactical evolution was possible, but seeing it in action. She paused, adjusting the focus to get a better look at the apparent leader of the group. That one, the tall man in the business suit. His motor control is far too refined for standard infection progression. He's retaining complex cognitive functions. The implications of Sarah's observations settled over the group like a heavy shroud. If the infected could maintain their tactical thinking while gaining enhanced physical capabilities, the traditional advantages that human intelligence provided were rapidly disappearing. The playing field was not just leveling, it was beginning to tilt in favor of their enemies. As they watched the infected conduct their methodical search, each survivor felt the weight of their new reality. This wasn't just about surviving random encounters with mindless zombies anymore. They were facing an intelligent, adaptive enemy that learned from every encounter and grew stronger with each victory. The chess game that Zephyr had envisioned had just become infinitely more complex, and their opponents had just revealed they were playing by the same strategic rules. Dawn broke gray and subdued as the survivors gathered in their secure communications room, the infected having finally moved on after a 6-hour search that had revealed their growing sophistication. Zephyr spread a hand-drawn map of the city across the central table, marking locations with different colored pins that represented the intelligence they had gathered over the past week. Red pins showed confirmed infected strongholds, blue indicated survivor groups, and yellow marked critical resources that remained contested. "We can't keep reacting," Zephyr began, his voice carrying the weight of command decisions that could mean life or death for everyone present. "Last night proved that the infected are developing tactical awareness faster than we anticipated. If we don't adapt our strategies, we'll be overwhelmed within a month." His finger traced a path along the map showing the systematic way infected groups had been claiming territory throughout the city. Sarah opened her notebook, pages filled with detailed observations about infected behavior and physiology. "I've been analyzing the progression patterns," she said, her medical background lending credibility to theories that would have seemed like science fiction just weeks earlier. The infection isn't just reanimating dead tissue anymore. It's actively rewiring neural pathways to optimize hunting and tactical behavior. The creatures we encountered last night had cognitive abilities that exceeded baseline human intelligence in specific areas. Thad leaned forward, his engineering mind already working on solutions to problems they were only beginning to understand. "If they're getting smarter, we need to get more unpredictable. My sensor arrays are good, but they're designed around predictable behavior patterns. We need systems that can adapt to intelligent opposition." He began sketching modifications to their defensive systems, each drawing representing hours of work that could mean the difference between early warning and sudden death. Marlowe adjusted her headset, monitoring communications from the other survivor groups scattered throughout the city. "I've been coordinating with Group 7 and the university survivors," she reported, her fingers dancing across her equipment as she maintained multiple conversations simultaneously. "Everyone's reporting the same evolution in infected behavior. Pack hunting, coordinated attacks, strategic positioning. We're not dealing with isolated incidents anymore." Indira spread inventory sheets across another section of the table, her organizational skills having transformed their supply management into a precise science. "Our current defensive position is sustainable for 2 weeks maximum," she announced, her teacher's instincts for planning showing in every carefully calculated number. "But if we're going to implement more complex strategies, we need to consider resource allocation for equipment that doesn't exist yet." Cassius returned from his morning reconnaissance, moving with the fluid grace that had kept him alive in increasingly dangerous territory. "The infected aren't just getting smarter individually," he reported, dropping his pack and accepting a cup of coffee from Indira. "They're developing specialized roles. I observed 3 distinct types during my patrol: scouts that move fast and gather information, heavy units that can break through barriers, and coordinators that direct group movements from protected positions." The revelation sent a chill through the room. Military-style specialization among the infected meant they were facing something approaching organized warfare rather than chaotic survival scenarios. Zephyr processed this information, his strategic training recognizing the implications immediately. "We need to think like a special operations unit," Zephyr declared, standing the pace as his mind worked through possibilities. Small teams, specific objectives, maximum impact with minimal resources. We can't match their numbers, but we can outthink them if we stay ahead of their evolutionary curve. Sarah nodded, her medical knowledge providing crucial insights into their enemies' capabilities and limitations. The neural rewiring I've observed has trade-offs. Enhanced tactical thinking comes at the cost of fine motor control and emotional regulation. They're becoming better hunters, but they're losing adaptability in areas that require creative problem-solving. Thad's eyes lit up with the spark of inspiration that had made him invaluable to their survival. Creative problem-solving. That's our advantage. They're optimizing for known scenarios, but if we present them with situations outside their programming. He began sketching rapidly, designing puzzles and challenges that would exploit the gaps in infected cognitive evolution. Marlowe looked up from her communications array, concern evident in her expression. Group 7 just went dark, she announced quietly. Their last transmission mentioned a coordinated assault involving over 50 infected. No word for 3 hours. The silence that followed carried the weight of friends lost and the growing reality that their enemy was winning the adaptation race. Indira gathered her supply sheets, her organizational mind already working on contingencies for supporting more aggressive strategies. If we're going to take the fight to them, we need to consider mobile operations. Living in defensive positions only delays the inevitable if they're becoming more sophisticated with each encounter. Zephyr looked around at his team, seeing not just survivors but potential warriors in a conflict that was reshaping the fundamental nature of human existence. Each member brought unique skills that, when properly coordinated, could create tactical advantages their enemies couldn't match. The question was whether they could develop and implement those advantages faster than the infected could evolve countermeasures. We're going to need allies, Zephyr concluded, his strategic mind already formulating plans that would require resources and personnel beyond their small group. Other survivor teams, coordinated operations, shared intelligence. The infected are organizing. We need to organize better. As morning light filtered through the mall's damaged skylights, the 6 survivors began the complex work of transforming from reactive survivors into proactive warriors. The chess game was entering a new phase, and the stakes had never been higher. 2 days of intensive planning had transformed the survivors from a defensive group into something resembling a special operations unit. Zephyr stood in the mall's main concourse, now converted into a tactical operations center with hand-drawn maps, communication equipment, and Thad's increasingly sophisticated defensive systems creating an organized chaos that would have impressed military planners in the world before. Their target was a critical one. The infected had established a stronghold in the city's main hospital, effectively cutting off medical supplies that multiple survivor groups desperately needed. More importantly, intelligence from Marlowe's communication network suggested the hospital was serving as a coordination center for infected operations throughout the Eastern District. Eliminating it would disrupt their enemy's growing organizational structure. Remember, this isn't about body count, Zephyr addressed his team as they conducted final equipment checks. We're here to gather intelligence, disrupt their coordination, and extract specific medical supplies. In and out, minimal engagement, maximum impact. His words carried the weight of military experience adapted to a new kind of warfare where the enemy learned from every encounter. Sarah adjusted her medical pack, now supplemented with sample collection equipment designed to gather biological data about the infected. If I can get tissue samples from their coordinators, I might be able to understand how the neural rewiring creates their tactical hierarchies, she explained, her scientific curiosity balanced by the practical need to understand their enemy's capabilities. The more we know about their cognitive evolution, the better we can predict their next adaptations. Thad's contribution to the mission was a series of sophisticated decoy devices designed to exploit the infected's enhanced hearing and pattern recognition abilities. These will create false heat signatures and movement patterns, he explained, demonstrating a device that projected holographic movement in multiple directions simultaneously. Their enhanced senses make them vulnerable to sensory overload if we can present enough contradictory information. Cassius had mapped 3 different entry routes into the hospital, each offering unique advantages depending on the infected's positioning and patrol patterns. The morgue entrance gives us access to the basement levels where they're less likely to expect infiltration, he reported, his parkour skills having been essential in reconnaissance that would have been impossible for conventional scouts. From there, we can access the main floors through service elevators that are still functional. Marlowe would remain at base, coordinating communications and monitoring infected radio frequencies that she had discovered during her signal analysis work. I'll maintain contact with Groups 7 and 12, she announced, checking her equipment one final time. If this works, they'll implement similar operations at other infected strongholds throughout the city. Indira had organized their extraction supplies with military precision, creating cached supplies at 3 different locations that would support their withdrawal regardless of which route circumstances forced them to take. Emergency medical supplies are positioned at every extraction point, she reported, her teacher's planning instincts having adapted remarkably to tactical operations. If anyone is injured, we have immediate treatment options that don't require returning to base. The approach to the hospital revealed the infected's growing sophistication immediately. They had established perimeter guards at strategic positions, created clear fields of fire around the main entrances, and positioned sentries with overlapping coverage patterns that would have been textbook examples in military tactical manuals. But Zephyr's team had prepared for exactly this level of organization. Thad's first decoy device activated near the hospital's main entrance, creating a complex pattern of movement and heat signatures that immediately drew the attention of 6 infected guards. As they moved to investigate, Cassius led the team through the morgue entrance, his movement skills allowing them to navigate obstacles silently while the infected's attention was focused elsewhere. The hospital's basement levels revealed the true extent of infected evolution. They had converted the morgue into a coordination center with crude but effective communication systems connecting different floors. More disturbing was evidence of tactical planning, rough maps showing survivor positions throughout the city, marked with symbols that suggested ongoing intelligence-gathering operations. Sarah moved quickly through the coordination center, collecting tissue samples and documenting the infected's organizational systems. They're not just communicating, she whispered into her microphone, they're conducting strategic analysis. This map shows they've been tracking our movement patterns for over a week. The realization that they had been under surveillance sent a chill through the team. The mission's climax came when they encountered the infected's command structure directly. 3 coordinators, each showing advanced cognitive retention, were directing tactical operations across multiple locations simultaneously. Zephyr's team had to make a split-second decision between extraction and engagement. Thad's sensory overload devices proved devastatingly effective. The coordinators' enhanced hearing and pattern recognition abilities became liabilities when confronted with contradictory sensory information. While they struggled to process multiple false signals, Sarah was able to collect critical biological samples and Cassius documented their command structure through rapid photography. The extraction proceeded exactly as planned, with Indira's prepositioned supplies enabling rapid movement through secondary routes while the infected's attention remained focused on Thad's diversionary devices. Within 40 minutes of initial penetration, the team was safely outside the hospital perimeter with intelligence that would reshape their understanding of the infected's capabilities. Back at base, analysis of the collected materials revealed both encouraging and terrifying information. The infected's tactical evolution was proceeding along predictable lines that could be countered, but their intelligence-gathering capabilities meant that traditional survivor strategies were obsolete. The war for human survival had officially begun, and both sides were learning to fight it professionally. The success of their first tactical operation proved that humans could adapt faster than their enemy if they approached the conflict strategically rather than reactively. But it also revealed that time was running out for unorganized survivor groups throughout the city. The infected's response to the hospital raid came faster and more sophisticated than anyone had anticipated. Marlowe's communication intercepts revealed coordinated movements across the entire eastern district within hours of their extraction, suggesting the infected had developed rapid response protocols that matched military efficiency. The enemy was learning from every encounter, and their latest lesson was that the survivors had evolved beyond simple defensive strategies. They've established mobile patrol units, Cassius reported from his morning reconnaissance, his usual calm demeanor showing cracks of concern that worried the entire team. Not random wandering patterns anymore. Systematic grid searches with overlapping coverage and communication checkpoints every 6 blocks. They're actively hunting for us. His parkour skills had barely kept him ahead of 3 separate contact attempts during what should have been a routine intelligence-gathering mission. Sarah looked up from her analysis of the tissue samples collected during the hospital operation, her medical training having revealed disturbing information about the infected's continued evolution. The neural pathway development is accelerating, she announced, pointing to microscopic images that showed dramatic changes in brain tissue organization. Whatever mechanism is driving their tactical evolution, it's becoming more efficient. We might be looking at cognitive enhancement that surpasses human baseline within weeks. THAAD's monitoring systems had detected systematic probing of their defensive perimeter throughout the night, suggesting the infected were conducting reconnaissance operations that mirrored the survivors' own intelligence-gathering efforts. They're testing our response times and defensive patterns, he reported, reviewing data that showed methodical attempts to trigger their sensor arrays from multiple directions. Whatever they learned from our hospital raid, they're applying it to finding us. Zephyr studied the tactical situation developing around them, his military experience recognizing the signs of an enemy that was transitioning from reactive to proactive operations. The infected were no longer simply responding to human activities, they were actively seeking to eliminate organized survivor groups through systematic hunting operations. The strategic balance that had allowed careful survivors to stay ahead of their enemies was rapidly disappearing. Marlowe's headset crackled with urgent communications from their allied survivor groups. Group 12 just reported a coordinated assault, she announced, her voice tight with concern. 47 infected attacking from 3 directions simultaneously, with tactical coordination that included diversionary attacks and flanking maneuvers. They barely escaped with half their people. The loss of experienced survivors was devastating not just for the immediate tragedy, but for the reduction in human tactical knowledge that each death represented. Indira spread her supply inventories across the table, her organizational skills revealing a logistics problem that threatened their ability to maintain complex operations. The successful groups are requesting support for defensive operations, but our resources are designed for mobile tactics, she reported, her teacher's instincts for resource management highlighting conflicts between competing priorities. We need to choose between supporting static defense and maintaining our offensive capabilities. The strategic dilemma was complicated by intelligence suggesting the infected were developing specialized roles that directly countered human tactical advantages. Cassius had observed tracker units that could follow human scent trails with bloodhound accuracy, while Sarah's tissue analysis revealed the existence of coordinator strains with enhanced pattern recognition that could predict human behavior with frightening accuracy. We're at a technological disadvantage, Thad admitted reluctantly, his engineering background forcing him to acknowledge limitations that his creativity couldn't overcome. Their biological evolution is outpacing our ability to develop countermeasures. Every device I create becomes obsolete within days as they adapt to our tactics. His latest sensor systems were already showing reduced effectiveness as the infected learned to avoid triggering the detection protocols. The infected's response to their hospital raid had revealed a level of strategic thinking that fundamentally changed the nature of the conflict. Rather than simply fortifying their positions, they had initiated citywide operations designed to eliminate organized human resistance through systematic application of military pressure. Survivor groups were being forced to choose between exposure through movement and eventual discovery through persistent searching. Sarah's continued analysis of infected communication patterns had revealed another disturbing development. They were actively sharing tactical information between different groups throughout the city. They're creating a learning network, she explained, showing audio analysis of subsonic vocalizations that carried complex information between infected units. Every successful tactic they develop against one survivor group gets transmitted to others within hours. Zephyr realized they were facing an enemy that combined the persistence of biological imperatives with the adaptability of professional military organizations. The infected weren't just surviving, They were actively working to eliminate human resistance through coordinated strategic operations that improved with each encounter. "We need to change the rules of engagement," Zephyr announced, his strategic training providing insights into conflicts where conventional tactics became liabilities. "They're adapting to our methods faster than we can develop new ones. We need to implement strategies that exploit their evolutionary advantages against them." The discussion that followed revealed the complexity of fighting an enemy that learned from victory and defeat equally effectively. Traditional military tactics assumed opponents with fixed capabilities and predictable limitations. The infected represented something entirely new, an adaptive enemy that became more dangerous with every encounter, requiring constant innovation in human strategic thinking just to maintain temporary advantages. As evening approached, bringing with it the increased activity period that the infected had adopted for their hunting operations, the 6 survivors faced a fundamental choice. They could continue reactive strategies that were becoming less effective each day, or they could implement radical new approaches that might provide temporary advantages at the cost of revealing their capabilities to an enemy that never stopped learning. The plan that emerged from 12 hours of intensive strategic planning would have been considered insanity in any conventional military context, but conventional warfare had become obsolete when the enemy could adapt to tactics faster than humans could develop them. Zephyr's proposal was elegant in its audacity. Rather than trying to hide from the infected's growing surveillance capabilities, they would deliberately reveal themselves in a controlled manner designed to exploit the enemy's evolutionary advantages against them. "We're going to teach them to hunt us," Zephyr explained to his team as dawn broke over their fortified position, "and then we're going to make that knowledge a liability." The strategy required precise timing and flawless execution, with each team member playing a role that depended on the infected responding to human behavior in predictable ways. Their rapid adaptation is their strength, but it's also a vulnerability if we can control what they're adapting to. Sarah had spent the night developing psychological profiles of infected coordinators based on her tissue analysis and behavioral observations from previous encounters. "Their enhanced pattern recognition creates cognitive biases," she reported, her medical training revealing weaknesses in what appeared to be perfect evolutionary adaptations. "They prioritize recent information over established patterns, which means we can program false behaviors that will override their tactical instincts." Thad's contribution was his most sophisticated creation yet, a series of devices that would create false signatures across multiple sensory channels simultaneously. "These aren't just decoys," he explained, demonstrating equipment that could simulate human heat signatures, movement patterns, and even chemical markers that infected enhanced senses used for tracking. "They'll create false learning experiences that will teach the infected to respond incorrectly to real threats." The first phase of their operation involved Cassius conducting a deliberately visible reconnaissance mission that would reveal specific movement patterns and timing sequences to infected surveillance units. His parkour skills would allow him to escape any direct confrontation while ensuring the infected could track and analyze his behavior sufficiently to develop tactical responses. "I'll give them enough information to think they understand how we operate," Cassius explained, "then we'll show them why that understanding is wrong." Marlowe had coordinated with the 3 surviving Allied groups to implement simultaneous operations that would force the infected to divide their attention across multiple targets. Group 7 will conduct diversionary activities in the Western District while university survivors implement extraction procedures in the North, she reported, her communication network having evolved into something approaching military command coordination. When the infected respond to multiple threats, their tactical advantages become organizational vulnerabilities. Indira had prepared supply caches that would support extended operations regardless of which phase of their plan succeeded or failed. "Each contingency has dedicated resources," she announced, her teachers' planning instincts having created educational objectives for a curriculum where failure meant death. "Whether we're reinforcing success or managing failure, we have immediate access to everything we need." The execution began before noon, with Cassius making himself visible to infected patrols in patterns designed to suggest standard reconnaissance behavior. His movements were calculated to appear professional but predictable, teaching the infected to anticipate human tactical responses that would be exploited in later phases of the operation. Thad's false signature devices activated across 6 different locations simultaneously, creating apparent human activity that drew infected response units away from their actual positions. The devices were programmed with behavioral patterns based on genuine survivor movements, making them indistinguishable from real targets to infected senses that had evolved to track human activity with perfect accuracy. Sarah monitored infected response patterns through binoculars and audio analysis equipment, documenting how their enhanced tactical thinking processed the false information they were receiving. "They're adapting exactly as predicted," she reported, watching coordination units modify their hunting patterns based on Thad's simulated human behavior. Their learning network is propagating false tactical information throughout their entire operational area. The climax of their operation came when infected forces converged on locations where they expected to find survivor groups based on the false patterns they had been taught to recognize. Instead, they encountered Thad's most sophisticated surprise: devices that exploited their enhanced senses to create sensory overload that temporarily disabled their tactical coordination abilities. While infected units struggled to process contradictory sensory information, Zephyr's team implemented rapid strikes against their coordination centers. The infected's adaptive advantages became liabilities when their enhanced pattern recognition systems were overwhelmed with information that violated everything they had learned about human behavior. Marlowe coordinated the extraction phases perfectly, with allied survivor groups implementing simultaneous operations that prevented infected forces from concentrating their response efforts. The infected's network learning system, which had been their greatest tactical advantage, became a vulnerability as false information propagated through their communication channels faster than accurate intelligence could correct it. The operation's success exceeded their most optimistic projections. Not only had they disrupted infected tactical coordination throughout the Eastern District, but they had taught their enemies to respond incorrectly to genuine human activities. The infected's rapid adaptation abilities, when fed false information, had created systematic vulnerabilities that could be exploited in future operations. But victory came with a sobering realization: they had only bought time, not achieved decisive advantage. The infected would eventually recognize and correct the false patterns they had learned, and their next evolutionary adaptation would account for the possibility of deliberate deception. The war for human survival had entered a new phase where each side was actively trying to teach the other to make fatal mistakes. 6 months after the operation that had disrupted infected coordination throughout the Eastern District, Zephyr stood on the roof of what had once been the city's main library, now serving as headquarters for the Regional Survivor Alliance. The view revealed a transformed landscape where human settlements existed in careful balance with infected territories, each side having learned to coexist through mutual respect for the other's tactical capabilities. The infected had indeed adapted to counter their deception strategies, but in doing so had revealed the fundamental limitation of their evolutionary approach: they could optimize for known threats, but struggled with scenarios that required truly creative responses. Human survivors had learned to exploit this limitation through constant tactical innovation that kept their enemies reactive rather than proactive. Sarah emerged from the medical research facility they had established in the library's basement, her face showing the exhaustion of someone who had spent months studying tissue samples from increasingly sophisticated infected specimens. "The evolution has plateaued," she announced, her medical analysis providing hope that had seemed impossible during the dark early weeks of the conflict. "Their neural enhancement has reached biological limits. They're as smart as they're going to get." Thad's workshop occupied an entire floor of the building, filled with devices that represented the cutting edge of post-apocalyptic technology. His early warning systems now protected 17 different survivor communities, while his sensory manipulation equipment had become standard issue for tactical operations throughout the region. "The new coordination protocols are working," he reported, demonstrating communication devices that allowed real-time tactical coordination between survivor groups across hundreds of miles. Marlowe's communication network had evolved into something approaching a post-apocalyptic internet, connecting survivor communities throughout 3 states and providing early warning of infected movements that threatened established settlements. "We're getting reports of successful agricultural operations in the southwestern territories," she announced, her equipment processing information flows that would have impressed military intelligence organizations in the world before. Food production is approaching sustainable levels for projected population growth. Cassius returned from a reconnaissance mission that would have been suicide 6 months earlier, his skills having been enhanced by equipment and tactical knowledge that made him nearly invisible to infected surveillance systems. The infected are establishing permanent territorial boundaries, he reported, his observations confirming what strategic analysis had suggested. They're no longer actively hunting humans who stay within established safe zones. Indira had become coordinator for supply distribution across the entire Survivor Alliance, her organizational skills scaling up to manage resources for thousands of people living in dozens of communities. Educational programs are showing promising results, she announced, her teachers' instincts having found new purpose in training the next generation of survivors. Children born after the outbreak are adapting to tactical thinking as naturally as we adapted to reading and mathematics. But it was the evening briefing that revealed the true cost of their survival. The Alliance now included 47 confirmed survivor communities, but intelligence suggested that hundreds of smaller groups had been eliminated during the early phases of infected evolution. The human population in their region had stabilized at approximately 30% of pre-outbreak levels, with survival rates directly correlated to the speed with which groups had developed tactical coordination capabilities. Zephyr reviewed casualty reports that had become routine reading, each number representing friends and allies who had died learning lessons that were now standard curriculum in survivor training programs. The chess game that had begun with his small team had evolved into something approaching conventional warfare, with both sides respecting territorial boundaries that were maintained through demonstrated tactical capability rather than formal agreements. "We won," Sarah said quietly as evening settled over their territory, her words carrying the weight of someone who understood the biological realities that made their victory possible. "Not because we destroyed them, but because we proved we could adapt faster than they could eliminate us. Evolution favors intelligence that can think beyond optimization patterns." Thad nodded, his engineering mind appreciating the elegant solution that survival had required. "They're still dangerous, but they're predictably dangerous now. We understand their capabilities and limitations well enough to coexist safely." His devices continued monitoring infected territories, but the data they collected was used for research and long-term planning rather than immediate survival. The infected had indeed evolved, but their evolution had followed biological imperatives that ultimately created limitations human creativity could exploit. They had become perfect predators for the world as it existed during their initial adaptation, but that perfection made them vulnerable to environments that changed faster than their evolutionary responses could match. As night fell, bringing with it the sounds of human children playing in streets that had once been death traps, Zephyr reflected on the chess game that had saved their species. The infected controlled vast territories and maintained populations that dwarfed human numbers, but humanity had earned something more valuable than victory. They had earned the right to continue existing and growing in a world that would never again be safe, but had become predictably manageable. The war was over, but the game continued. Both species would keep evolving, keep adapting, keep learning from their encounters with each other. But humans had proven they could stay ahead of the evolutionary curve through conscious strategic thinking that turned their enemies' strengths into predictable weaknesses. Somewhere in the infected territories, creatures that had once been human continued their own existence, optimized for a world that no longer quite matched their capabilities. And in the human territories, children learned tactical thinking as naturally as breathing, preparing for a future where survival would always depend on staying one step ahead of perfection. The chess master had taught his pieces to think for themselves, and in doing so, had won the only victory that mattered, the chance for the game to continue.